Hey everybody, welcome back to Dynamic Alignment Bodywork. This is another Friday video blog, so nice to be here with y'all. Today I want to talk about spontaneous movement, so less spontaneous, less planned or orchestrated movements, and how that can be really helpful and easy to incorporate into your life. And I bring up this blog, feels pretty timely for me because this less and less scripted movement becomes an increasingly important part of my life, both as a practitioner in this room and as somebody with my own body and aches and pains and stuff that I'm working through, having more kind of like playtime. But we'll get into that. Really quick, the premise for what we're doing here, and we'll then move into the exercise which you can do right now, especially if you're at your office, your work, or at your home. To move up from sitting will be a great time to do this. The idea is, and when we move more less scripted and spontaneously, we're moving out of a pattern that we can get really used to. And if you've worked with me at all, or even if you haven't, right, this is a pretty common notion that if we do something a lot, an example that's often cited is if you're an office worker, right, and you type, especially if you, the slouch gets often is sort of the bad example, or if you have good posture or whatever you think of that as, right, you have a certain memory, and that's both a kind of mechanical holding, like our tissues start to shorten and create certain shapes, and a neurological one, what we might think of as muscle memory. And interestingly, there's actually more and more research coming out that's saying those are kind of the same thing, or they're very much interwoven at least. So we do something enough times, our body starts to develop a memory for it. If you've ever ridden a bike, if you've ever stood up on your own 2 feet, right, and walked, like we all learn as a kid, we get this sort of motor memory. Any type of athlete will have, and is working on developing this motor memory, right? It's sort of like if you're a power lifter, you need to go into a certain stable position. If you don't, you'll hurt yourself. Especially elite level athletes, you can see this taking the same shape every single time. An elite cyclist will develop the same shape that they just know how to get into. And all of us are doing this all the time to probably a less drastic degree. So the problem, I feel like one of my teachers in this field, Tom Myers, put it a way that I really like, of the problem isn't taking on any particular shape ever. So we call the problem less like that you have to sit down at a computer and do work. The problem can really be when you take that home with you, or when the activity is done, are you still maintaining that shape? And that's true for a lot of us, and a lot of times we say that the saying might be like, I carry my stress around, right? It's sort of like a stressful event happens and we go into contraction mode, and then the stressful event is over, or it was all, most of the time it's a figment anyway, so we're sort of carrying it around like this, right? We could say the same thing about if you ride your bike to work, if you're sitting down a lot all day to stand up and still kind of keep this shape. We start to get locked into a pattern which is starts to allow us less and less freedom to move and open up in different ways, which most of the time what gets our attention is pain. It hurts. I sit like this long enough and eventually the muscles in my back and neck and shoulders will tend to start to ache. It's not like a 1-to-1 ratio, but that's a pretty common phenomenon because they're doing the work of holding my head and shoulders and back, pulling me up. So a great remedy, and I think very underutilized in this world, is to do some spontaneous movement. And I just wanted to chat with about this for a second, and maybe debunk a couple of myths, especially as I start to play with this more and more. So spontaneous movement, if you wake up and yawn in the morning, right? Okay, great, there it is. That's what we're talking about, that kind of opening. That's not necessarily, and this is not to downplay the importance of a structured workout routine, but it's not necessarily like a yoga asana, right, or a scripted thing to do. It's not a lift or something that came from anywhere else. It's a sort of listening, and again, I sometimes don't like that word because it can sort of imply this oh, what's going on, like a very subtle thing, but listening in just a very obvious way. And in a way that's not, if you wake up and your back's stiff, we can sort of okay, here we go. Right, and get on with your day. Which can be fine if that works for you. And for most of us, like, okay, there's something else going on. So to stand up, you can even do this in your chair, but just have a little bit of time, and it's funny to watch someone else do it, because the important part is the like internal experience, right? So the important part isn't to imitate anyone else's like, oh, they're doing this kind of like wavy, hoovy-groovy thing. Again, which is like, if that's what you're doing, great. But the only thing that matters is that you are moving your body in different ways than it's used to. A couple of pointers, or things to keep in mind. One, like a lot of what we talk about in here, this isn't slamming against a barrier. There can be a time for that, right? But it's not like, oh, you feel like this, so you go like, and kind of pry and push yourself open. It's less that and more kind of leaning back into an edge. Maybe you start to bring that into a roll. You bring your arms up into it. Another tip would be to feel for a tensional line throughout your whole body. I just led a anatomy class for climbers last night, and we did quite a few experiments with this, of how to grab onto something and then sort of hang there like a sack of meat and like lean into it, and how much force that puts in a specific joint, right, in this joint of your shoulder. And if you do that 100 times, 10,000 times, eventually this will probably start to hurt. Versus hanging onto something and engaging your arm and your whole body in a way where I can actually feel my feet coming up through my pelvis, through a stable trunk, and out through my hand. And it's not even important to see the whole picture here, just knowing that I'm listening for a kind of feeling where literally I can connect my hand to my foot through my body, as opposed to maybe more of just to like, okay, I'm just kind of throwing my hands this way and that way. That could be fine, right? We're interconnected whether we want to be or not. But that felt sense of it, I find, pretty quickly guides most of us to a lot better, a better quality of movement. Another hat you can try on during these spontaneous movements can be like, imagine if you were the only person in the world who knew anything about movement, and it was your job to like get yourself out of whatever sort of pain pattern or dysfunctional pattern you were in. Thankfully, that's not the case. We do have workout routines. We do have, good personal trainers and physical therapists and yoga asanas and workout routines, and all this stuff can be amazingly helpful. And I would call it all secondary to your own standing on your own 2 feet in these experiences. So this can be a great time to just start to like strengthen that muscle a little bit. I'd suggest, just so you don't have it in your head, do this where nobody can see you. I mean, if you don't care, you don't care, right? But take 5 minutes, 5 minutes a day. I don't know, that would be my prescription for a lot of people, right? And just see how it is. You can play music if you want. Even then, like that's okay, but even more simple would be no music. And see what it's like to just move in unscripted ways. This can be slow, this can be faster. A lot of times slower facilitates a better, or kind of a stronger felt sense in our body. When we go fast, we can start to lose that feeling of connection. You can start to play with, it depends on how aerobic you are, right? Like inversions, handstands, cartwheels kind of stuff. But I would caution you against a couple things. One, or not caution, that's not the right word. For this exercise, I would say don't go less into things that are familiar. So if you're really great at cartwheels, by all means kind of like bring that in to your movement. And the point isn't to do a bunch of cartwheels really cool. Like you can totally do that, obviously. And if you want to try on this experiment of like a different kind of movement, maybe spend a little bit more time on your weaker side, or see what it's like to like move into it in a little bit different way. And it's really an experiment in feeling yourself in motion. Movement for the sake of movement, not to get anywhere or look a certain way, or even be training for anything, right? But to move and to feel. So I hope this is helpful. One of my goals in this video is I was recently very inspired by Israeli dancer and movement instructor Ido Portal, and I'll link his video to here, and he's amazing. But I think a lot of times we see someone like that talking about like free movement as doing these very like very gymnastically complex and difficult movements, you know, and you'll see if you watch this video with Ido Portal, right, he's doing backflips and spinning, and it's very, very beautiful to watch, and he clearly has a very free body and system. And it'd be a shame if that was not an inspiration, or if that was anybody like, okay, you know, that's a nice idea, but like I'm not going to be doing any of that. Like hardly any of us are. So if you are very stiff and immobile, great, there's your edge, right? And I don't mean to downplay any like pain symptoms that might be happening in your body, but to work with that. And if you can lift your arm to here, okay, great, start to lift and move and like stretch with a little movement in ways that are, again, unplanned and, yeah, spontaneous. I think a lot of times I would hear that word and think like spontaneous means sort of like wild and crazy, but it doesn't need to be. And in fact, again, we can sort of start to lose touch if it starts to take on any certain look in our minds. So, like always, go see it for yourself, and I'll do the same. I really hope this is helpful. Happy Friday. See you next week.